Hey guys, welcome to Rosie's Dessert Spot. In this episode I'll be teaching you how to make very sharp edges on your fondant cake. To start off, I'm preparing my cake, and a very sharp buttercream cake is the perfect foundation for this. So I've got my buttercream here on some baking paper that I've stapled down to a very flat wooden cake board. That's important because the cardboard ones tend to have a bit of a curve to them. Then I'm putting my cakes on top, pressing it into the buttercream, and then just layering all the other layers on top as well. And I'm making this cake for the purpose of the fondant tutorial, but usually with layers of cake this thick you would add a bit of a sugar syrup in there just to keep it nice and moist. Gonna make sure they're all centered and press them down to make sure it's all nice and flat and level. Then I'm taking my spatula and removing any excess from the sides. I'm also taking my bench scraper and removing all that buttercream at the very bottom of our cake, and using the spatula to clean up the sections that the bench scraper didn't clean up. Let that rest in your freezer for about 10 minutes, and then we'll add our crumb coat. So I'm adding a whole bunch of buttercream at the very top, then smoothing it off nice and flat and moving that to the edges. That way I can start covering the edges of my cake and filling in any spaces where there's air pockets, just to make sure that they're all nice and filled with buttercream. Then let that rest again in the freezer for 10 minutes and we'll add our final layer of buttercream. I'm making sure to add heaps of buttercream here because we're going to go in with our bench scraper later on and remove all that excess. And making sure that your bench scraper is nice and flat and angled at a 90-degree angle, nice and tall, and scraping away slowly all that excess buttercream. And I'm removing a little bit at a time. You don't want to try and go too heavy or apply too much pressure onto the side of the cake. Then I'm smoothing off the top as well. And because this is going to be turned upside down, you don't need the top to be really flat. We can fix it up later on, and it's a lot easier to do so later. Then I run my bench scraper under some hot water and very slowly move it along the sides of the cake. And this will smooth it off and give it a nice even finish. Do the same for the top, not that it was necessary. Then I let it set in the freezer for about 20 minutes. I'm adding a little bit of buttercream to attach my cake board. And you can also set it in the freezer after you attach your cake board. Then I'm going to cut off that baking paper and flip my cake upside down. Just like so. And then you can remove your baking paper to reveal a nice even flat surface with just about the sharpest edges you could probably achieve with buttercream. Then that section at the bottom, like I said, we're going to fill that in with some buttercream and then remove the excess with our scraper. And you can't even tell. That's nice and smooth now. And I'm reapplying some baking paper onto my cake board, just stapling it down on both sides, making sure it's nice and tight. And rolling out my fondant to about 3 millimeters or so in thickness. The thing with the fondant is that you want it to be nice and thin. That'll create a nice sharp edge. It's probably a little bit thicker than I should have. I should have continued to roll out a little bit more, but it still worked. I'm going to apply it over my cake. And the first thing I do is push out any air from the top and then quickly secure your edges, because it is a very sharp edge. You can very easily cut your fondant and make it crack at the very top. Then apply it to the sides just by pulling down and flaring those out, those creases, and you'll keep going until you've covered the whole cake. Then I'm using a small spatula here to cut off the excess. Okay, using my fondant smoothers just to smooth that down and make sure it's all nice and attached, and then flip my cake upside down onto that prepared cake board that we have with the baking paper. Then I'm taking my smoothers and I'm going up and down up against the cake, and that'll push the fondant down to the bottom, so onto our makeshift non-stick cake board. And I'm smoothing sideways to make sure that's nice and sharp, and that'll pinch the fondant between your cake smoother and your board, so it creates a really sharp edge. Once you're happy with the results, flip it back up, right side up, and you should have some pretty sharp edges as is. Then take your fondant smoothers and just start smoothing the sides and pushing that fondant at the top up against your other smoother and moving back and forth, and that'll pinch the fondant and create even sharper edges. I'm doing the exact same thing here with some plastic acetate sheets, and this is just to cover off a plastic pocket folder. Then with the exact same action, just pushing the fondant and pinching it in between those acetate sheets and moving back and forth. And that creates very sharp edges because it pinches the fondant as we did before. Just showing you a closer look of what that looks like in slow-mo, or as slow as I can go. And then just smoothing it off. And that's how you create very sharp edges on your fondant cakes. A tip that I would definitely give is to have your buttercream as smooth and as sharp as possible, because that'll give you the best base and the best outcome. Another thing is you could try making it sharp with your fondant smoothers, though I find that this takes a very long time and many times it doesn't create as much of a sharp edge as compared to using those the yellow sheets. And I literally just cut that out of a portfolio folder cover. Now I think in the video I show about maybe 2 or 3 minutes worth of me just working at those edges, pushing the fondant sideways and up with those two sheets. In real life it took me about 25 minutes to achieve this level of sharpness in the corner of my cake for the fondant. So it does take a little while, depends how much time you're willing to put into it, if you're a perfectionist or not, but it can take a little bit of time. And that's how it's done. Thanks guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial and I will catch you really soon.